Honestly unbalanced.
Yeah, normally we don't sort of start off talking about people's journeys, but I'm just so curious to know how you moved from, it said in an article somewhere, from numbness and depression to a life of abundance and awakening. So can you please talk a little bit about this journey, or as much as you like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just start off really deep. I experienced a number of losses of griefs between the ages of 10 to 14, which meant that I just went to move in, I went to live in my head, basically. And I was a very embodied child, as many children are, like always running around, skipping, playing, dancing. But over those 4 years, it became unbearable to be in my body. So I went and studied law in English and in French. I don't know why, two systems, two languages, just like anything to keep me from kind of going down. And yeah, worked in the corporate world, was living abroad, and did all those things that I thought would make me happy, tick the boxes, and realized that actually I was completely numb. Even though I was doing all these things that I thought in my mind would make me happy and successful, none of that was really working. It wasn't what I thought it would be. And one of the first indications to me that that was the case was in my then relationship. And I realized in the bedroom that I felt very numb, and the bedroom is one place where we should feel lots of things. So for me, in that space, that was really a catalyzing moment where I felt, okay, there's something really not right here. And at that time, I felt that the problem was just in the bedroom. But when I actually started to look at the numbness, it was actually cascading into every other part of my life. And so that really set me on this journey to first discover the tools to kind of turn my own body back online, and then to realize that actually our sexuality, sensuality are really these taboo subjects.
Yeah.
So I started writing about them in a blog back when people used to write blogs, and realized that there were other people that were searching for the tools that I had found really helpful. And that's when I started sharing them, really. And my journey in kind of discovering those tools really led me back into my own ancestry. So I'm a first generation British Indian woman, and I grew up with a lot of rituals in my home. My father was a monk before he was married. And I'd grown up with a lot of like yogic and tantric traditions in the ritual white tantra space, not what you think when you hear tantra. um, so when I was kind of rediscovering all of these tools, I started to see a lot of the practices that I saw when I was a child in the UK, and really started to draw this bridge from my experiences then, from my heritage then, into some of the problems that we face living in the Western world in 2024 now. So yeah, so that's sort of how I got from A to B or here to there.
What does you mentioned the word embodied there? Like, what does that mean to you to be embodied?
Yeah, well, embodied to me means in the body rather than in the mind. And for me, being in the body, if I look at it from the way of the senses, which is something that I'm really passionate about, as the bridge that kind of draws us into our body, then it is being able to have this consciousness of the five senses and using those as the tools through which we become more present. So something that I try to use instead of mindfulness has really grown and expanded, and everyone knows what mindful is. But for me, I feel like language is really, really important. And to me, mindful is almost the antithesis of the practice. So I use this word senseful. How can we use our senses to become more present? How can we listen to the sounds as we're walking? How can we feel the textures of the air? All of those things that are kind of umbrellaed under the mindful practice, but just doesn't make sense to me to call it that word. So I call it senseful. And for me, that's the way to kind of drop into the body and kind of move down.
This sounds like a
Yeah.
strange question, but it's something that I've sat with quite a lot. And it's when people say, "Oh, I'm not really in my body," sometimes I think, am I in my body? Because obviously I'm walking around, I can feel my body, but am I, how do you know if you're actually living from a place of embodiment or if you are living more in your head? How do you know if you're living more a life that is sort of more on the numb side to one that is
Yeah.
more, does that make
Yeah, I
sense?
think, yeah, absolutely. I think sensations are happening moment to moment, and being in bodies is being aware of those sensations. So the sensations are happening regardless of if we're aware of them or not, but the awareness piece and our response or witnessing of them is what brings them into the embodied space.
Mm.
For me, just in my personal experience, when I was feeling very numb, there was a lot happening in my body. There was a lot of pain, emotional pain, physical pain, um, but I couldn't feel those things. I wasn't aware that they were there, of how they were manifesting in my body. There was a kind of override button playing out. So I think that's where I would discern those. Yeah.
Mm. And in your work, what would you say do you see are the main blocks of, I don't know if you work more with women or men, but in whoever you work with, what would be the main blocks for people not living in alignment with their highest, purpose and their most authentic selves? What is blocking people from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly in my realm of work, because I work particularly with the subjects of sensuality and sexuality. So those subjects, of course, the biggest block to that is usually around shame, whether we're
Mm,
working with males, anybody. It's shame. It's, am I allowed to feel these sensations? What does society say if I do feel these
mm,
sensations? Who am I allowed to feel them around? So shame is definitely the biggest, like one of the first things we come into contact with. Then there's also our traumas,
mm,
um, and big traumas, little traumas, whatever they are, the way that they may be within the body, overriding other parts of feeling, or drawing us into the moment when it happened rather than now. Because as trauma lives in the body, it doesn't really know that timeline of whether it happened in the past or uh, if it's not happening anymore, it will just present as if it's happening all the
mm,
time. So that's a really big block, I'd say, to feeling the embodiment that is now, the sensations that are now. And I
mm,
think a big part of my work is just, yeah, drawing that presence into now and being able to distinguish the timeline.
mm,
Yeah, the timeline of when things happened. And then the second two, I would say, are uh, stress and fear. Um, so yeah, the more, I mean, stress itself is a sensation, of course. And it's a sensation I feel like we need to befriend rather than, there's a lot around like reducing stress, not feeling stress. But I think, if we didn't have stress in our body, then we would be a puddle of bones and muscle on the floor, wouldn't we? So a
yeah,
certain level of stress in the body is required to get around our day, to get things done, to feel motivated, to feel energized, but discerning again, what's the tipping point? When is it too much that it's actually sending me into overdrive,
mm,
or sending me into underdrive and not feeling anything at all? Um, yeah, so I'd say those are sort of the main
mm,
blocks.
A lot of the blocks you talked about there could be blocks for people even trying to connect with your work in the first place as well, can't they? Like if even if someone Googled kind of a sensuality course, they'd maybe feel like a lot of shame. They wouldn't want to do it at
mm,
work. If they were doing it while they were sitting on the bus, they'd kind of maybe look over their
mm.
shoulder. So I just wondered, do you find the people that work with you are people that are actually quite already deep into it and just want to go deeper? Or do you find there's people that are quite new to it and actually have identified the needs and have kind of stepped up to meet it? Because I imagine it's quite intimidating for many people.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple of different streams of the way that we work with people. We work in the Tantra yoga community. So that firstly is just understanding Kundalini energy, sexual energy within our own bodies and kind of befriending it for ourselves. So sometimes we have people that are completely new to any practices that are looking specifically for unearthing sexuality, befriending it, understanding it before they want to share it with a partner. And then we have couple practices. So then we have couples who may be interested in expanding their sensuality, or maybe they've lost sensuality, or maybe they're just at a different stage in their relationship now and they're looking for ways to morph it into something different. So we have a range, and I think particularly in our tantra yoga community, something that I'm very, very passionate about sharing is philosophy, mythology, ancient texts. So we draw in a lot of teachers, a lot of people that may have already done a training and are looking to kind of have a place that they expand their knowledge week to week, where we discuss that kind of the non-physical side of the yogic practice. So we have a range, I would say.
I love that you talk about I think it's important for people to know that sexual energy, you know, if you would have said that to me a few years ago, I might have been a bit like, oh, sexual energy. And I have worked through a lot of shame around this, like I think a lot of people have done. More recently, I heard that sexual energy is the same energy as, I mean, you say it's Kundalini energy, it's the same energy as creative energy, as life force energy. And when it was reframed to me like that, I thought, God, we've been so lied to through society. Like sex is made out to be this taboo, or don't talk about it. I mean, when I first learned about it, my mum chucked me a book about sex when I was about 10 or 11, and, it was never spoken about. So you're immediately made to feel like you're doing something wrong or it's shameful. And there's just so much conditioning you need to break through to get to the actual truth of what it is. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this huge kind of untangling to do, that when we work with our sexual energy, it doesn't mean we're having sex. And
Yeah.
that's why people think tantra is sex,
Mm,
um, because they think that it has to be to do with that act. And something that ancient traditions realized a long time ago is that our sexual energy is one of the most powerful energies in our body, enough to create life. And
mm,
so if we are not planning on procreating all the time, how else can we use that energy? So when tantra moves into further east and it moves into Taoism, you would see the emperors there using sexual energy. It was known as Qing there, in a way to extend their lives, to cultivate life force so that they can live long, healthy, prosperous lives as emperors. But they would also use it as ways to kind of direct that energy into different organs, and to use that energy to really cultivate both blood and life force energy, to create healthy bodies, healthy organs. And when we do move that into sexuality, there are two things that are required for arousal. There is blood and there is energy. So it works in all ways, whether we use it in our pelvis or whether we use it in other parts of our body. And like you said, it's creative energy. It creates life. And it's also our creative life force. So it's great for, you often find, and I myself found that when I started to connect with this energy within myself, or with this side of myself, or these practices, so much creativity unlocks. Just the way that I saw the world became a more artistic, I would say. um, and that could be because I was more relaxed. That could be because I was more energized. There's definitely this correlation. And even if you look at kind of energetically where sensuality is stored in the body, it's in Svadhisthana, right? The dwelling place of the self. And this area is also where our reproductive organs are sat. So our creative energy, our sensual energy, it's all sort of stored in the same energetic area of the body, as well. And when I came back to the UK after living in Asia for a couple of years, I was kind of curious as to how to integrate some of the revelations, some of the impact of the practices, because there's a lot of cathartic practices that happens in, like, particularly in the trainings that I had in India and in Asia, and not much integration of where that information went. So when I came back to the UK, I studied art therapy, as a way of kind of bridging some of the impacts of the practices that we have, and allowing them a space to unravel, through art, through music, through dance, before words, right? So this kind of bridge between that unconscious state, like when you come out of Shavasana, sort of that unconscious waking up, but not quite having the words to put to it. And I feel like that's a really nice place to play with non-verbal expression, and the senses.
I get asked the question a lot because I teach like a small amount of this sort of stuff on some of my sound healer trainings, and I always get asked, is there any difference between Svadhisthana, the sacral chakra, in men and women?
Well, Tantra sees it doesn't really see genders in the way I think we see genders as male and female. So it sees bodies as bodies. It sees Shiva and Shakti within each body, different levels that change through different stages of our lives. So from my experience, I would say Svadhisthana as the chakra, no. I would say that is in all bodies. But if you move like further down into the root and you see the different anatomical differences, then I would say yes, because you would use perhaps different practices for each of those bodies. So I think that's how I would distinguish. Yeah.
Tantra and how confused it is in the modern world. Like, I think for most people, when they think Tantra, they just think Kama Sutra, or like that's all they think of. And I'm sure if you Googled the word, that would be pretty high on what would come up. So I just would love you to explain, even for many yogis, what it actually is and what it isn't, and maybe kind of what you think the stereotype is presented as, and what it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tantra tan means to expand, and tra is an instrument. So, direct translation is an instrument to expand. So, it's sometimes called a technique. Tantra is a series of techniques in which you can expand your consciousness. There are 64 different schools of Tantra. There's the right-hand school that's more orthodox. There's the left-hand school that's more open. And within one of those schools, there is a school that has something called the 5 M's. And those 5 M's traditionally would have been substances that the teacher would give to the student in which they can alter their state. Some of those 5 M's are things like meat, fish, wine, sex, things that you wouldn't usually find in the traditional spiritual practice. And these would be used as for a period of time with a practitioner to see, when you use these substances, how do you feel? How does it alter your energy? And rather than, I suppose, sex, for example, as Tantra is most widely connotated for, rather than sex having this huge kind of energetic force pull over us, how do we have practices in which we can kind of become the master of it rather than it becoming the master of us? Now, I think when you look at different paths along history, there are not many that embrace sex and sexuality as just a natural part of life. And Tantra really sees everything just as a natural part of life. It's really this path of non-repression. And so I think when, particularly when like the British came to India, this was like, whoa, this is like really different, like Christian values, tantric sex practices, what? And it was seen quite boisterous, and Tantra had always, not even just then, but even in India, it was seen as black magic because it has these very powerful practices for cultivating energy that can be, directed at different people. So it's kind of misunderstood across the board, even in India. It's not only in the West. But yeah, because it has sex as one of its many practices. This is the part that I think has been cherry-picked and kind of transported. And so now you'll see in the West, you'll see neo-tantra, like the new wave of tantra. But in India, like this wasn't really a thing. This is something that was really reserved for the highest level of practitioners. Once they'd done the practices to master their energy, they'd be given these kind of periods where they would be given these practices by their teacher. So there's been a bit of a distortion, I would say. And I think just the same way that in a lot of countries yoga is seen as stretching, but we've made our way to kind of understanding that it's a little bit more than that now. I think Tantra is now this kind of next wave. It's the sister science of the yogic practices. And sometimes I've heard like yoga is known as like the father in the Eastern spiritual practices, and tantra is known as the mother, like the feminine. Um, and it's really beautiful because it really places the feminine, women, goddesses at the figureheads of the practices. And I really, really love that. I love that because when it came around in the 6th century, a lot of the spiritual practices in India were conducted by Brahmins, by the holy caste, by men. And it actually placed goddesses at the forefront. And it says that women have this really naturally residing connection to Shakti, to power. Um, and we could be spiritual teachers too. And I think that's just, it's so beautiful, it's so empowering, and it really offered this path not just for the spiritual caste, but for the everyday householder, in which they can do their rituals, in which they could find, I don't want to say enlightenment actually, because there's this whole thing of finding liberation, but Tantra, I would say liberation from what? Because this reality right here, this is it. Like this is Shakti, this is divinity, this is God, godliness. So it's really, yeah, this reverse process. And yeah, I love that because it's very practical for
It's
everyone
beautiful.
to apply to their lives.
You say it's misunderstood as well in India. Like, was it misunderstood by your family at all when you kind of moved into this career direction? I know you said your father was a monk, but so was it understood by them, or was there any judgment from them when you moved in this direction?
Yeah, there was. I think because it's misunderstood as black magic, kind of witchery in India. My mum, when I first started holding kind of circles and pulling cards and things like that, she did pull me to a side and she said like, "Beta, darling, like, what is it that you're doing?" And she's like, "Are you a witch?" And I was like, "No, like these are practices that we've always had, that we've always done. For example, 4 times a year we practice something called Navratri, and this is like 9 nights of the goddess. And this is something that I grew up going to. It's at the change of every single season. It's 9 nights where we gather at night and we do a dance called Garba. Garb means womb, and the beautiful thing, I suppose, about Eastern spiritual practices is that there is this unwavering, we've just always done this, so we will continue to do this. But no one often stops to ask, why are we doing them? Because they're not really practices for the mind, they're practices for the body, right? So you do it, you feel it in your body, you continue doing it. It's worked for your mum, it's worked for your grandmother, it's worked for her parents and their parents. And this is how it was in my family. It's like we just do the rituals, but we didn't really know why. We just knew that they worked. So a lot of my journey has been kind of answering the questions of my Western mind and bringing them into like the rituals of my of my Indian heritage, and kind of drawing the bridge between those both, which is something that I like to do in my work as well, because I think it also creates safety when you're asking someone to when you're asking someone to shake or do these practices, or garba, do the dance of the womb, which all
Love
men do
it.
as well, by the way. It's a really beautiful really beautiful practices that evokes a lot of kundalini energy in the body, because your feet are kind of pounding against the floor very rhythmically, and it's just a certain number of steps that really moves you into this state of movement meditation. So yeah, there was a lot of kind of explaining to them that this is not anything new that I'm doing. It's nothing to be scared about. Yeah.
Uh, on the same kind of topic, but at a different level of importance, family being the most important, the public on social media, and I guess both. It's important to educate and inform what you do, but there can be lots. Well, there can be lots of misinterpretation on social media just because of the context, because you're trying to explain concepts in a 10-second entertaining reel, and and you're trying to have an educational undertone to it somewhere. People won't watch a whole thing. People won't kind of correlate who you are and what you're doing with that single post. Like, has there been any awkwardness or unpleasantness on that, or has it been okay rounding? And if there has been unpleasantness, how have you dealt with it? Have you just kind of deleted and blocked and let it go away? What's been the tactics?
Yeah, that's definitely my tactic now. I think when I started my account, I came to one of your, when I first came back to London, I went to a festival and I went to one of your workshops, Adam. So I
Yeah,
actually
amazing.
have been in one of your classes like many, many years ago. It was one of the first things that I came back and experienced. And that that sort of first year, I was just kind of getting to know how the wellness world worked in the UK, just like running around studios, schools, offices, like everywhere, basically, spreading myself very thin. And I realized that in some of the places that I was teaching, I was being asked to kind of cut out the spiritual stuff. And I don't give like hour-long seminars. I was maybe, chant a few ohms and set a bit of context to the class. And for me, that felt really uncomfortable because for me, it wasn't just a practice that's part of my heritage. It's like I can't associate the yogic practice without those things. And when the Black Lives movement happened, Black Lives Matter movement happened around the COVID years, the lockdown years, right? A lot of Indigenous communities started to speak out about things that they had worn in their hearts for a while. And one of the things that I started to speak about was cultural appropriation in yoga. And this was when my community online really expanded, because I think I was speaking about topics that had been worn in the hearts for a lot of people, but that just weren't really being spoken about. And I received a lot of backlash for that, like a lot of backlash. And I really changed kind of the way, the keyboard warrior way in which I shared that information, and started to talk more about cultural appreciation rather than cultural appropriation. Because I realized that no one kind of wakes up in the morning with the intention of pillaging tantra or yoga. It's a completely
You know what?
unconscious.
I wouldn't be sure. I think that may happen. I think that I actually, like, I see that. What did I see the other day? That's like, oh my. This was actually somewhere that I have a link to saying, okay, we're going to do this particular yoga combined with fitness class, and this is what it's going to look like. And it basically, as part of the text, saying, and this isn't appropriation. And I was like, everything about it is, because it wasn't like acknowledging the source material. It was actually taking something and turning it into, okay, and this will help you look good, and this will help you. That was the vibe. And there is, I think there is, and there's many other places that do that. I think there is sometimes that intent that this yoga thing is cool. We want to make money, so let's change yoga to what will make us the most money, but keep using the name. A good example actually is like the dog yoga trend, and I got asked to do that multiple times by different companies that get puppies from God knows where they get puppies from, and the idea that I would teach some like made in Chelsea people. Nothing wrong with them, but they're the kind of people that would be at the events. I teach them, and I was like, I cannot do that in any way. Like I would teach dog stretching, more than happy to do that. Dog contortion at a push.
Yeah.
As in, I would teach a class. So it was a fun class where we were stretching whilst playing with dogs. But the moment you add the word yoga to it, that's where I feel there's problems.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I think that I think when I shifted into cultural appreciation, the tone of the comments that I was receiving changed, because I moved more into kind of commenting what I thought was going wrong, and more into just providing information to support some kind of evolution within the wellness space. So one of the things we created, myself and another teacher who teaches at the School of Sensual Arts, we created something called the Cultural Appreciation course. Cultural Appreciation for Yoga, and we go through like Sanskrit pronunciations and formulas to remember the names of postures. We go through like the mythology behind some of the postures, and some of like the gods and the goddesses, and where the names for the postures came from. We go through like mantras and pronunciation of mantras, and like historical context of mantras and texts as well. So a lot of the things that kind of the 200-hour traditional course just don't have time for. We try to create something that would help to impact teachers, but also students who may want to learn more about the non-physical aspects of the practice as well. Yeah,
I think it's so important that trainings do their best to try and include some of that. So we've got, do you know Radhika Das?
yes.
So he's involved in our training. Like he's doing kind of guest sessions. and he's leading a kirtan as part of it. On that note, some words before, I guess we'll talk more about this topic, but I'd love to hear, because you mentioned you teach pronunciation, so common Sanskrit words that are often mispronounced. So I think one of them is chakra. Old people chakra, which is chakra. Is it chakra? Am I saying it right? So where some common words that are often mispronounced.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's because the A sound, it's like so it's like chakra, chakra. Another one is the goddess Saraswati, because it's got a W in it. So it's, sometimes you hear it as like Saraswati.
And
it's
Birmingham, it's Saraswati.
Yeah, exactly. So it's Saraswati. Another one is Lakshmi. So Lakshmi, goddess of prosperity, wealth, Diwali, and that you hear that A sound again as a. It's like Lakshmi, like lucky, Lakshmi. So I think that A is one of the big spots that, like it's a really simple fix. Like as soon as you know A is it transforms it and it's everywhere. The A is everywhere. And sometimes you also hear like in India you'll hear people say they might not pronounce the A on the end of like asana. You just hear like shavasana, and the A will become sort of a bit more silent, and that's just a variation of Sanskrit. So when A is on the end, it will become slightly softer than when it is kind of in the middle of the word. So very subtle things, but Sanskrit is this vibrational language. So it's like when we feel like the tones and the textures of it, it really starts to magnify, like expand in its vibration, I think.
So it makes a difference to your body, your physical body, when you pronounce Sanskrit words differently or correctly or incorrectly. Yeah.
For example, each of the each of the chakras has a bij mantra, right? It has this seed sound, and that sound will directly penetrate to that energetic, that physical area in the body. So it's like an instruction, right? It's like, say this sound, direct it to the body. So the sound is helpful. It's helpful, the nuance, understanding, hearing the nuance, but also the intention. Right. The intention is very, very important. So I'm not saying like everyone has to have a perfect Sanskrit pronunciation. The intention is also very, very important. And it's just this is adding information and supporting deepening in what we know.
Can I ask two follow-up questions kind of related to that? And I'm going to say them both now. The first one is regards regional variation. So like in the UK, like I just did a Birmingham accent because I'm from Birmingham, so I'm allowed to technically make out a Birmingham accent. But there's not only variations in terms of words that are used, but variation in pronunciation. And is there that to the same degree in terms of pronunciation of kind of Sanskrit words in India, or actually is it more uniform across the country? Because I think one of my kirtan teachers, the guy called Dave Stringer, when he got criticised, he talked a lot about intention. He's led kirtan sessions in India for forever, but his view often was when someone would speak to him with an Indian accent, say, "Well, that's not how you pronounce a certain word." He might say, "Well, that's not how you pronounce hello." You're saying hello with an accent, and I'm delivering it with an accent that I try not to have, but I undoubtedly have. So that's one question I have, and the second question I have, in fact, park that. Let's answer the first question.
Yeah, I think the thing with Sanskrit is that it's not a conversational language. So we don't speak Sanskrit in India. We only use Sanskrit for spiritual practices mostly, and for text and reading and mantras and the yogic practice. So there's that distinction first, I think, between it being hello and it being it being for a different purpose. I think that's kind of one distinction. But in my research, I have found that there are different regional variations of Sanskrit even within India. So I think whatever you do, whichever school you belong to, whichever part of India you're from, you're always right. So I think that I know that there are different regional variations of Sanskrit. For example, like the texts that appeared, the tantric texts that appeared in Kashmiri Shaivism, those would belong to the north of India. Those would be perhaps a little bit different, even written in a different times, to the Mahabharata, to the different like Hindu yogic texts. So there will be variations across time. There will be variations across regions. I think that I think that it's helpful for us not to argue about what is right or what is wrong. And I think that's where the intention piece really, really is important. And just moving more from this idea of that is wrong to have you tried chanting it like this? How does that feel for you in your body? Is it any different? If it's not, continue as you are. If it is, then this is another option for you. So yeah, so I think that's how I'd respond to that.
And the second question is coming back to kind of cultural appropriation and appreciation, in that something like yoga and the delivery of it and has evolved forever, and how it's taught us, it's constantly evolving. To speak to Kirtan for a moment, harmonians were brought to India by Christian missionaries. They're all designed to be Christian hymns, and yet it has been used and it's become a traditional instrument, as it were. And when yoga was brought to the West, the delivery mechanism changed slightly, whether that be asanas changed slightly to modify based on body types of very different proportions, and in different body types in every sense. And I wonder, in terms of delivery of philosophy now, like I, as a teacher, I'm delivering yoga teachings as best as I can, but often through different words. So the same sentiment, but through different words. Sometimes through dad jokes, and I find them to be an effective medium sometimes. But the same core message in a different way. So I just wondered what your thoughts are in terms of how the delivery has evolved of yoga, or in tantra in a broad sense, and perhaps how your delivery of it is different to what might have been the case 50, 100 years ago.
Yeah, actually, I love this question because, like, with tantra, for example, it's sometimes called a technique, and it's also sometimes called a technology, and I love that because I feel like it responds to the problems of society in the moment that it is being delivered. So the medium may change, because that's why these practices have survived for so long, because they have adapted to what is happening in society at the moment. So, for example, at the moment, perhaps there's a common collective consciousness or common collective sexual repression that needs to be addressed, which is why the technology of tantra has adapted itself to address the problem of its time. And maybe in 1,000 years, there'll be a different problem to address, in which case the techniques may be similar, but the language which we use to address it will be adapted to that time. And I really like to think of these systems as these morphing practices to support what is happening in society at that time, and also what is happening for us in our lives through the way that we understand it. I definitely feel that as I'm kind of moving through different stages of my life, the way that I relate to my own practices is shifting, kind of the way that you said that now it's coming through your dad jokes, because that's the embodiment of where your practices are right now, right? And yeah, so I think that I think that it's, in order to survive, it morphs like jams. Yeah.
And I wonder, with techniques, if it like a technique might exist and, as you say, survive, but the name might change. I remember the Dalai Lama. I think he said this on a video at some point, that he didn't mind if Buddhism didn't exist in 100 years, as long as the technique. I don't know if we'll use the term techniques, but as long as you call it whatever you want, it could just be mindfulness forevermore. But as long as they exist, he will be happy. I've talked quite a lot, and I know Holly had so much to ask you, so I'm going to shut up for a little bit. So.
Oh no, okay. I mean, this might seem like a really obvious question, but just for the listeners, what is it that you are trying to do with all of this work? What is your underlying purpose? What is the result of what happens to your life when you start to apply these practices that have brought you into awakening and abundance? I suppose I've maybe answered my own question there, but yeah, what do you feel your underlying intention and purpose is?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this with another definition of tantra. So, another definition of tantra is a loom, which is a device that weaves something together into cloth. So, for me, this is like a beautiful metaphor for what this practice achieves. It weaves together all of the threads of our lives into one tapestry. So those are the threads that we liked, those are the threads that we don't like, those are the experiences we haven't quite understood yet, those are the bits of us that are repressed. It's really this practice that's not just about love and light, it's really about darkness as well. That's why our tantric goddesses live around the cremation grounds with skulls around their necks. They're not your traditional like airy fairy kind of they really draw us into our shadows, and so these practices weave together all these aspects of ourselves so that we can feel a sense of wholeness in who we are. And I think that's one of the most beautiful gifts that we can give ourselves, acceptance, and those around us as well. Because I think the more that we accept all of those messy parts of ourselves, all the beautiful parts of ourselves, the more that carries through to each person that we come into contact with, so that they can accept themselves as well.
That feels like a beautiful place to close.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners? Any sort of last messages or words of wisdom?
I just want to share that, if you have heard the word tantra and you thought it was just sex, then this is an opportunity to explore that a little bit more, just to see what else might be there for you. Because if you're interested in yogic practices, it's very highly likely that you'll be interested or intrigued by the tantric practices. And so, if this is a moment for you to do a little bit of study around that, or attend a workshop, or ask any questions around that, then this is your sign.
And a sign to maybe actually have a look at your book,
I was gonna
which is out.
say.
When is your book out?
Yes, it's up there on that shelf there.
Yeah, plug away.
Yeah. So my book Sensual, it is out on the 21st of May 2024, and it's this invitation to connect more deeply, to express more freely, to love more intimately, and I do that by weaving together the sister sciences of yoga, Ayurveda, and Tantra, looking at the four most common blocks to sensuality, sexuality, and exploring where we can use our sexual energy inside the bedroom, but also outside of bedrooms. So Holly, you were saying our creativity, our projects, our work, and how we can really use that incredible life force inside ourselves to nourish other aspects of our lives.
And the book is called Sensual, isn't it?
The book is called Sensual.
And I wonder, as a side note, if it will be more purchased on Kindle. Because the reason I say that is like how many people potentially would be shy about reading the people that perhaps need that book most would be shy about reading it. Seeing their colleagues on the way to work and they're reading a book called Sensual. The cover looks spectacular. Or maybe they buy the hardback and just slip the cover.
It's so true, isn't it? It's so true. I think I was reading a book called Pussy on the tube, and I definitely got some looks, and it's an incredible. I highly recommend that book. It's an amazing book. But it's never judge a book by its cover, I would say. But it's also available in audio, and of course on Kindle as well for discreetness.
Do you do the audio?
I did the audio. Yeah.
You got a good voice for the audio. And then where can people find you?
You can find me at the School of Sensual Arts.co.uk. We have an online community, online date nights for couples to take at home rather than in a big room full of 20 other couples. So that's a really, really nice thing to do. And you can also find me in person in workshops around London and Europe, and on Instagram, Henika.x.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was amazing speaking to you both.
Honestly Unbalanced.